So, you're glaring at those changes to White Mage and Endwalker. Let's discuss them. In this video, we'll be looking over the Meteor information and seeing how the job has been transformed. Do remember that all this information is tentative and the things that I talk about are subject to change following the official release of Endwalker. This video is just an analysis and my initial thoughts going into it. As like the previous Scholar and Astrologian video, I will not be going over the potency changes unless it impacts the job's gameplay, as they are subject to change the most. Now let's take a peek at what White Mage got, shall we? Let's talk about their level 90 skill Lilybell first, because I think it's the most interesting and I have a lot to say about this ability. So getting right into it, Lilybell is a 3-minute cooldown that allows you to place a healing blossom at a maximum range of 30 yalms at a designated location for a duration of 15 seconds. This will then heal for 400 potency in a 20 yalm radius around the healing blossom for each instance of damage the White Mage takes. This can happen up to 5 times for a total of 2000 potency. At the end of the 15 seconds, Lilybell will then heal for 200 potency for each remaining stack. This ability is very similar to Panheima with some trade-offs. Lilybell has a higher overall healing potency than Panheima, but is much more restrictive in potential uses. Let's talk about the good parts of Lilybell first. Lilybell is an extremely strong tool, being arguably the highest healing tool we have in the game, sitting at 2000 potency if using it to its full extent. To put into perspective, this is around 70 to 80% of a DPS or healer's HP pool, and around 55% for tanks. This makes it extremely valuable for heavy hitting multi-attack AoEs that you may see in Savage or Ultimate raids. Another strength of Lilybell is that it actually lets you heal the party without being near the party. This is one of Scholar's biggest strengths, and now White Mage has it too, although more time limited. Now let's get into some of my concerns about Lilybell. First and foremost, it only has a duration of 15 seconds. That makes using this ability very hard to fully utilize, meaning gaining the full effect of 2000 potency is going to be unlikely outside of enrage AoEs or spammy AoEs like Tumults. I want you to think of mechanics that we have now where you can actually fully utilize this ability without overhealing much and at least getting 4 hits under its duration. Of course, this can change with fight design in Endwalker, but I struggle to understand why this ability isn't on a longer duration given its effect and nature of the ability. Secondly, Lilybell is bound to have instances where it will miss a player during what could potentially be a stressful scenario, as the heal radius is only 20 yalms. While this may be unlikely to happen, it is still a possibility and can happen if the party has to spread out in a far radius. Compare this to Horoscope, Macrocosmos, or Panheima, which is applied to each player individually, and it's almost unfair that a 3-minute ability can miss. Why not just give it a 30 yalm radius like Temperance and just make it practically guaranteed? Thirdly, Lilybell is prone to be wasted on chip damage attacks. Abilities like Elemental Break / Cycle of Faith or Final Omegas Enrage that hit very low before a much stronger attack are going to proc Lilybell's effect, resulting in unnecessary overheal. Unfortunately, there's really nothing you can do about this. This is just a drawback of the skill. Fourthly, Lilybell procs off the White Mage and does not proc off other party members taking damage, which means it's unfortunately going to be simply less efficient for mechanics that aren't raid-wide or for the damage that is close in timing. Think of mechanics that target specific job roles, or mechanics where the White Mage does not want to take damage but is now forced to in order to ensure Lilybell will proc. And lastly, while this one isn't really as severe in my book, the potency being halved after the duration ends feels like kind of a shot in the foot anytime you aren't able to fully utilize all 5 stacks. Now, to reiterate, these are my concerns and not necessarily complaints. My goal here is to make the skill as user-friendly and fluid as it can be, which is why I'm asking these questions. We have no idea how practical Lilybell will actually feel in new encounters. I'm just bringing attention to some potential issues that this skill may have come Endwalker. Now, with all my concerns spelled out on paper, all of this comes back to one of my core issues that I have with this ability, and that is the fact that on top of all my concerns, the skill is a 3-minute cooldown. Unless the skill gets some serious quality of life adjustments, I can't really see it being justified as a 3-minute cooldown. Now moving on, let's talk a little bit about Aquaveil. Aquaveil is a new off-global cooldown on a 60-second cooldown that reduces damage taken on the applied target by 15%. This is another very strong tool and is the strongest single target percent-based mitigation tool out of all the healers. Depending on the scenario, this ability can get some insane value. Tank busters that hit multiple times are just scenarios where the tank is taking a lot of damage through AoEs, and auto attacks will be the primary instances where Aquaveil shines. This ability is very similar to Exaltation, Astrologian's new level 86 ability, with key differences being that the mitigation aspect is 5% stronger, and it lacks the 500 potency heal that Astrologians will enjoy. This, however, does not make it necessarily weaker, as both are good in different situations. Now, let's get into some of the changes to White Mage's old toolkit and the new playstyle of the job. Due to the changes in cast time on glares, playing White Mage offensively has become a bit different to say the least. Now that we have a 1.5 second cast time, we are no longer going to use lilies as a primary movement or weaving tool. This is a double-edged sword to us because while it lets white mages mainly focus on only healing with Rapture and Solace, it's also going to feel really bad when we have to use more than one lily and then be pigeonholed into using the rest just to ensure that we don't end up losing potency by wasting 1 or 2 GCDs, but not using a third to let us make up the difference with Misery. It's also worth noting that due to the changes with Glare becoming a 310 potency skill, there's now more of a gap between 4 Glares and a Misery due to Misery's potency not being increased to compensate. To reiterate, these potency issues are easily changed via balance patches and should not be focused on too much. It does actually leave us in a weird position, however, where if we want to do 1 GCD heal before a fight ends, it's actually better to cast a Medica 2 or Cure 3 over using a Lily due to the reasoning that 3 Glares plus 1 GCD heal is 930 potency, and 3 Raptures plus 1 Misery is only 900 potency. To put it simply, the cost of casting Medica 2 or any other GCD heal is now only 310 potency, while the cost of casting 3 Raptures is now 340 potency, which is a trade-off of 200 potency in healing for 30 potency in damage. Keep in mind this is all subject to change with any tiny amount of balancing Square Enix does following the Mediator build that we're looking at. With these changes in cast time, we can also freely weave our off-global cooldown abilities like Assize, Asylum, Divine Benison, Aquaveil, Temperance, Lilybell, and Plenary without worrying about lining it up with either our dots or creating weave windows via Rapture or Solace. This is an extremely good quality of life change for White Mage, and honestly the 1.5 second cast time change affected White Mage the most in a good way. Thin Air has also been nerfed pretty heavily. Thin Air is now on a stack charge system and only works on the next spell after activation. This means we will no longer save as much MP on average, and also no longer allows us to spam GCD heals in emergency or heavy healing windows without repercussions. What this might mean for White Mage is that we're going to want to avoid using healing abilities like Medica 2 and Cure 3 and relying on Rapture as much as possible when not using Thin Air. While the Thin Air change is easy to see as strictly a negative, there are some positives to it, and that's due to the fact that you can now spread out raises more evenly during progression. Divine Benison has been changed to getting 2 charges, which gives White Mages a slightly stronger single target mitigation toolkit. This ability can work for tank HP upkeep by keeping their HP at a sustainable level through mitigation, as well as just generally maintaining tank's health pools or using it on a DPS who may have missed a heal. This new change also enables shield cheesing to be more accessible for White Mages. Lastly, we have Holy 2. The potency is now increased by 10 compared to today, however with the increase to Glare being 310, White Mage AoE is still the only healer that does not benefit from 2 target AoE spam. This is to compensate for Afflatus Misery and Assize being very strong AoE tools. Now, I want to get into a bit about White Mage versus Astrologian and their toolkits. While White Mage can be strictly compared to every single healer, I really want to focus on the other pure healer, Astrologian. When comparing White Mage to Astrologian, we can see that Astrologian has a much more filled off-global cooldown toolkit and a similar GCD healing toolkit. When comparing GCD healing toolkits, both Astrologian and White Mage have similar toolkits with each one having their own niche advantages. Cure 1, Cure 2, Regen, and Medica 1 and 2 variants are all fairly similar in nature, except Medica 2 is 5 yalms wider than Aspected Helios and Regen has no on-hit healing. White Mage also has Cure 3, which enables it to burst heal in heavy amounts fairly quickly. This is even taken up a notch with Plenary Indulgence. On the flip side, however, Astrologian has Neutral Sect, which allows them to put out incredibly potent healing and shielding every 2 minutes. White Mage also has Rapture and Solace, both of which being instant cast and costing 0 MP, and Rapture being 20 yalms. This can kinda be compared to Lightspeed. White Mage gets 3 instant cast lilies every 90 seconds, while Lightspeed enables you 7 GCDs of instant cast every 90 seconds. White Mage, however, is able to space out their instant cast heals within that 90-second range, letting you potentially cover different windows. Just like we went over Scholar and Sage, both have their advantages and disadvantages. Astrologian also has another tool known as Synastry, which lets them heal 2 targets at the same time, or do much stronger GCD heals on 1 target, something White Mage doesn't have anything to contend with. When it comes to comparing their off-global cooldown healing toolkits, White Mage kinda falls a bit behind in this regard. Their single target healing toolkits are nearly identical, with White Mage having 2 Divine Benisons and Astrologian having 2 Celestial Intersections. White Mage having Benediction and Tetragrammaton, and Astrologian having 2 Essential Dignities. Both also have new level 86 healing abilities when leveling up in Endwalker. But then we get into their AoE healing toolkit. Astrologian has Earthly Star, Collective Unconscious, Celestial Opposition, and Horoscope, all of which are on 60-second cooldowns, making them incredibly powerful and versatile. White Mage, on the other hand, has a very strong heal with Assize, which is on a 45-second cooldown, but then has a 90-second cooldown and a 3-minute cooldown that currently heals for at minimum 1000 potency. These longer cooldown abilities make them hard to be versatile as they aren't going to be up as often as their competition. For the sake of simplicity, I'm also classifying Macrocosmos as an off GCD heal as it has neutral damage on single target and can be procced via a button. This ability can reach similar potencies to Lilybell, however it requires more optimization as it requires the party to be at a low HP to fully utilize it. It is also more versatile as it doesn't require the White Mage to take damage and is on a shorter cooldown. A side note too is that even if it's just RNG, Astrologian has access to Lady of Crowns, which is a 400 potency AoE heal, and while not a heal, White Mages have Temperance, which can be used as a mitigative effect. When looking at their toolkits side by side, we can see that they are very similar. White Mage is better at dealing with reactionary situations that need immediate burst healing and doesn't take too much thinking to properly utilize its abilities, while Astrologian on the other hand can deliver insane amounts of healing via their off-global cooldowns but requires more finesse as the majority of their abilities like Earthly Star, Horoscope, Macrocosmos, and Collective Unconscious require fairly precise timings. Both of these healers have their strengths and weaknesses, and I'm curious with fight design in Endwalker how it's going to shift the meta. Now let's give a brief overview of what White Mage is. When looking at White Mage, we have a traditional pure healer with a fairly straightforward healing toolkit that centers around powerful GCD heals that allow to excel in reactionary environments like progression or party finder content. White Mage possesses some of the strongest burst healing options in the game with their absurdly powerful GCD toolkit and is able to increase the speed at which they are able to push the aforementioned GCD abilities out with presence of mind. They're also the only healers whose GCD toolkit is centered around a 20 Yalm radius, with Rapture and Medica 2 being both 20 Yalms. They are also able to mitigate damage in a radius of 30 Yalms around them with Temperance, giving them an advantage over other healers in certain scenarios. White Mage also has some of the highest personal damage of all the healers as a trade-off of not having a raid buff, which gives them an edge during progression or inexperienced environments where players might not be as aware of buff windows. On top of all this, White Mage is one of the biggest benefactors from downtime as they can optimize Lily usages to fill the Blood Lily during downtime, allowing them to gain a monstrous amount of potency depending on how many are used. While White Mage has its strengths, it also has its weaknesses. They have the smallest off-global AoE healing toolkit out of all the healers, only consisting of Asides, Asylum, and now Lilybell, two of which are on fairly lengthy cooldowns. This means that after they deplete their usages, they have to fall back on their GCD heals. When also comparing it to Astrologian, it has less mitigation, only having Temperance with it being on a 2-minute cooldown. Compare this to Collective Unconscious and Neutral Sect, and Astrologian has the option to mitigate more frequently as CU is on a 60-second cooldown. This actually shines in the current raid tier as an Oracle of Darkness. CU is up for almost every Shockwave Pulsar. However, while this is a weakness, it can also be a strength. While CU and Neutral Sect are better at dealing with heavier and less frequent hits, Temperance can be stronger in situations where there's a lot of damage back to back and or the party is spread out. This can mean anything from Hello World or Junction Shiva to Fate Calibration Beta or BJCC phase in T. So that's going to wrap up my analysis on the existing healers. In the next video, we will be going over Sage and seeing how its toolkit works with the other healers and in the current fight design.